Welcome to We Talk Money. I'm your host, Robert Geniak, author of the international bestseller, Rich is a State of Mind. And my guest today is Brian Parent, president of Families First Funeral Homes. Now, there's a lot of things that people talk about guarantees in life, and there are really only two: death and taxes. And since we've just finished income tax season, I thought we'd have some fun today talking about the second of those, which unfortunately is death. And Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Interesting you should say that, because I kind of felt like death after doing my taxes this year.
As many of us do on an ongoing basis. So tell our viewers, if you will, how long you've been in the business, what's a little bit about the family history of Families First Funeral Homes.
Okay. Well, I myself started in funeral service in 1979, actually just shortly out of high school. I was kind of tricked into the business by a gentleman who was just an awesome funeral director at the time.
Okay.
And I continued on for a number of years with them and then with another company. And in 1996, my wife and I decided to open up the first Families First location, Families First Funeral Home on Dougal.
Okay. So how many locations do you have currently?
We have 4 locations now, one on South Windsor, one in East Windsor, one in Amherstburg, and one in LaSalle.
Okay, so covering a wide swath of the geographic area
most
here.
of Essex County. Yeah.
Great.
Yes.
How many employees?
65.
65.
65,
So that's great that, you know, it's inspiring the economy and providing opportunities for growth in the area.
It's good for us and them. I mean, we tend to have a little more team than most funeral homes do. We think it takes more team to provide great service, and so you know, from a perspective of having more employees, it helps to provide better service.
So in terms of setting up for the show, one of the things I was doing some research on is myths about your industry. So we hear the term pre-planning and we hear the term prepaying in terms of funeral services. Are they the same thing?
They're similar, but they're very different. In one instance, most people think you have to prepay a funeral in order to pre-plan it, which is not true. Which is, if our viewers forget everything else today, I'd like them to remember that you can pre-plan a funeral without prepaying anything at all. If a funeral home is making them feel obligated to prepay, they may want to take a step or two back from them and look around at a couple of other funeral homes and see what options they have. Because the most important thing for the consumer is to put the information down in a logical way in which we can then give that information back to their family at the time. So we can say, well, your mother was in, they asked, and this is, you know, kind of what their plan was for you.
So there are a number of things people don't like thinking about. One, they don't like thinking about death. They don't like thinking about wills. So if I pre-plan a funeral, then I can just skip the will part, right?
No. The will is essential, and a lot of people don't understand how important a will is. A will puts someone in charge of funeral arrangements, so that we know who to take direction from. The absence of a will puts everybody in charge of funeral arrangements, and that's really the last thing that we really want to do. We want to know what it is what's going to take place. We want to know who's in charge. If all 4 children are in charge, then, because there's no will, if a person's died intestate, then they all have to agree. And it's not always just the 4 children, but it's their spouses who are feeding information from the background.
So it evolves into a giant family argument.
It could easily become a family argument where it doesn't need to be. If mom and dad want things to go smoothly for the children, regardless of whether they have a lot of assets, a very simple will done with a lawyer, and I don't necessarily encourage legal will kits, although will kits are out there, they're available in the market, but if you don't follow it 100% the instructions, then it may be contestable. So we always suggest many lawyers will do basic wills for anywhere from a couple $100 to about $400, and you'll save that much just in problems or issues that could occur at the time.
And family angst on its own.
Exactly.
I think this is a great place to leave our discussion for right now. I'll be back with Brian Parent of Families First Funeral Homes after this short break.
A staggering 40% of all majorly injured patients in Windsor-Essex are impaired by alcohol or marijuana. When you go out, it is your responsibility to make plans for a sober ride home. Designate a sober driver, call a taxi, or use public transit. The choice is yours. Drive sober, get home safe. Or the next ride you get might not be taking you home.
Welcome back to We Talk Money. My guest today is Brian Parent, president of Families First Funeral Homes. Now, Brian, one of the things that you provide other than funeral services is there's a lot of value added for your clients. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that we realize is that the executor has a lot of responsibility after the funeral. And so what we've tried to do is reduce the workload on the executor to make it easier. Many times filling out forms, even simple forms like lump sum death benefit applications, spousal benefit applications, children's benefits applications, returning health cards, social insurance cards, notifying Old Age Security, Revenue Canada, doing applications for life insurance policies, contacting the agent, contacting the employer of not only the deceased, but the employer of the spouse.
And what this does really is, in a time of high stress for a family, it starts to take some of the things off the table that we ordinarily would have to remember about going, did I do this, did I do this, did I do this?
Right. It's difficult for a family to start to begin the grieving process so that they can move on to mourning when they're worrying about the details. So what we try to do is take the details off the table, and not only do we say we're going to do all these notifications for the family, but we provide them a list of things that they're going to need to do later, so that the 3 or 4 days during the course of the funeral service and the celebration or the ceremony, they can focus on the needs of their family during that period of time and not necessarily their role as an executor.
So you've been in this industry a significant amount of time. What are you seeing as evolving trends in the industry? What's changing today that maybe we didn't see 5, 10 years ago?
Well, I think we have less religion. We have more people saying, you know, I don't know if I want to do a service because we're not religious, and we're starting to say, but a ceremony is still important. So there are important things that we can do to help to accomplish that. We have celebrants. They are people who will do a service that is non-religious, and they're considered more what people call a celebration of life. Where when you
very
attend
non-denominational.
They're non-denominational, and there's no religious content at all. It's really about the person's life, about what they enjoyed. We not only talk about all the good things, but sometimes if the person had a trait or two that, you know, that might have been things that were funny or things that maybe weren't even good, we talk about it.
They can be brought up and shared amongst
family.
family.
Talk about the person as the real. As the real. So
now, when we talk about pre-planning a funeral, we might be doing that 10, 15, 20 years in advance before we actually need it, or potentially prepaying it. Are there safeguards, industry regulations, so that we, the consumer, something doesn't happen 15 years from now?
If you decide to prepay, and many people choose to do that, it's a matter of personal choice, but if you decide to prepay, the money is put in either into a trust fund or an insurance fund separate from any assets of the funeral home itself. So those funds stay there and they collect interest. The interest is used to offset the increase in cost. So the funeral home in Ontario, and this is not the case everywhere, Ontario has really good legislation and laws. In Ontario, if you prepaid a funeral today, the funeral home has to guarantee that there'll be sufficient funds in there to cover all of the services and merchandise that you've purchased today will be paid for in the future. So if the interest gathers, and let's say you prepaid $10,000 today, but at the time the service is being done, all the costs are $20,000, but there's only $18,000 in the account, then the funeral home loses $2,000. If there's $21,000 and the costs are $20,000, then the funeral home loses $1,000. Or refunds $1,000, sorry.
In terms of last question for today, if there was something you wish people knew about your industry or your business, what would that one thing be?
Oh, gosh. I think if there was one thing that I think it's important for people to know is that they need to slow down. They need to slow down and take some time.
Take a deep breath. Everything's going to be okay.
And they need to take some family time with mom or dad prior to disposition, whether that be burial or cremation. Sometimes today when people are looking to simplify, when you want to simplify your service, you need to do more than just necessarily have the cremation or have the burial. Sometimes you need to just take a few moments, not even if sometimes it's 1 or 2 decision makers don't need to have much, but sometimes external family members do. So it might be just take a little bit of time to just spend a few moments, a little bit of family time with that person prior to disposition.
I think that's great information for our viewers who are learning more about the concept of funerals, funeral homes, what it all means, and what it means to us in terms of planning for a future that we know is eventually going to happen, but nobody wants to think about. Brian, thank you very much for being my guest today. This has been another episode of We Talk Money. I'm your host, Robert Geniak. If you've got ideas for upcoming shows, please drop us an email. We'd be happy to address those topics in future episodes. And for now, thank you for watching.